most of you will probably, or will recognise, it hasn't changed that much, I don't think, the village square. Petty Sessions is right over to the right, and that little angle wall is still there. There's not a lot of change along the street, other than this building is no longer here. Most people look at it and think it is, but that was Alfie Hannes. So the buildings stop here at the end of what was the manse, Jim McElroy, the last person in there. But Petty Sessions, as you can see, was right over there to the right on the corner. And I love this picture. It's like the fact there's so many children in it out, obviously playing. There's horse and cart over there to the right as well. Not a car inside. Isn't it great? You can get parked anywhere. So that's one of the earlier ones. And this is a later scene with the end house gone. And that would have been, I think, the 60s, whenever the new road was made, that the house was taken away. And Petty Sessions is there on the right. Not a lot changed since then either, just the left hand side there, what was a gate, a door, is now a window. But the building is exactly the same, really, the outside, and the same facade around the door there. So I first started to look into this when I took over the business down there, and thought there'd be nothing to do, only go and contact the courts and get all these books, and they would tell you about all the court cases and who was there and who was tried and all the rest. But there weren't any. So I was in Newry Court, rang them, they didn't really even know what I was talking about, and rang Armagh, and nobody knew anything. So it turns out there were no records kept of anything, Petty Sessions in those days, apart from who they appointed magistrates and the clerks and all those kind of things, but the actual cases were not recorded. So it was all newspapers. But all these things are in print, so if anyone's offended tonight, or any family members or ancestors are mentioned, it's all on public record in the newspapers. It has been in the press already. So I went to the local libraries, Armagh and Newry, and those days there was no online looking, so it's all through. There are microfilms to find things, but you didn't really know what you were looking for, so that took all the longer. But you eventually found the Petty Sessions reports, which were in every month. So I'll begin now. The system of Petty Sessions courts dates from 1828, and an Act of Parliament in 1827 provided for the division of the counties of Ireland into Petty Sessions districts. And county councils were also ordered to provide the courthouses and keep where they should be, take place, and they to fix regular dates, and these were to be conducted by local justices of the peace. Now these justices had to be landowners, they had to be men, no women allowed, they had no legal qualifications and were unpaid. So in 1847, the Petty Sessions in Poyntzpass was held on the second Saturday of every month. By 1851 it had changed to the second Tuesday. 1852 it was twice a month. I don't know if that was because there were so many cases or what, but it was the first and third Tuesdays. And from 1872 on, and it was once a month on the first Monday. And it continued on like that until 1927. Nothing changed when Petty Sessions were held on the first Saturday of the month. And this was also the fair day in the village. So it was the day on which the village was full with people selling their animals, their wares, whatever they could. Some of them have travelled quite some ways and had a few pounds in their pockets, maybe towards the end of the day. So naturally enough, they retired to the local hostelries. And after all the dealing was done. So there were quite a few then of these cases came out of those hostelries. So drunkenness was the dominant factor in a lot of the cases, and that's recorded in Poyntzpass, Townriggy, Market Hill, Newry, all the smaller villages have their own petty sessions as well. So, we're moving on now. Now, I don't know if any of you know what that is, or have seen it before, but it is called a Scold's Bridle, and it was in use in the Sessions House in Armagh until the early 19th century, and then it was passed into private ownership. So just to tell you what it is, before the petty sessions, the Armagh Manor court rolls, I've taken this from, so these were a series of rolls relating to courts late in the Manor of Armagh, and they existed before, obviously before petty sessions. So when they were first held is uncertain. It could have been in existence in Ireland until, or they couldn't have been in existence in Ireland until after the Anglo-Norman invasion. So the next century they were beginning to fall into decay, and there's no record of the Armagh Manor Court functioning after 1714. But the contents of the rolls vary, and they were divided into sections, so there were lists of jurors that were attending sessions and those who were fined for non-attendance, and plaintiffs and defendants in cases ranging from trespass, assault by battery or drawing of blood, to the ringing of pigs. And they form an intriguing picture of social conditions in the manor at that time. So some of the offences dealt with are rather reminiscent of today, even though the penalties might not be the same. So at a court held on the 10th of October in 1625, Pierce McCasey was charged with being a lazy vagabond who refused to work and slept into the day. Now there's no fine recorded, but according to this, we can be sure that he suffered some form of punishment. I think we have quite a few of those people maybe around today, but I don't know about them being punished or not. And then in 1626 there was a Patrick McQuaid who was described as a common tippler who kept bad rule in his house, and he was fined 3 shillings and 4pence, and on 16th of October following, Madeleine Quash presented as a common scold, and this is what this was used for. Now she was lucky enough to escape this here, but what this is the Scold's Bridle, and it was a very effective, I'm quoting here, if somewhat inhumane instrument. It was used in those days to curb the tongues of unruly women. So I don't know if we still need one or not. Maybe a few people might want one, I don't know. But that was what happened. So that was fitted over the head, and the bit was put in the mouth to stop any more nagging. That seems how it was used anyway. So it was still, it was an iron framework, yeah, and it was designed to fit over the head. So the gag was formerly part of the equipment, old 17th century session house that this here was, and the building was replaced by the present courthouse on the Mall. So it was reported in the Memoir of Armagh that there were 4 notorious scolds in Armagh, so they must have been resident and on a daily basis using these, one of whom, a Mrs. King, poisoned her husband and had her eloquence stopped by the hangman. So there you are. So she didn't need that after all. Now this picture here, I'm sure most of you recognise. It's what we know as the Cracked Bridge. I used to think it was the Cracked Bridge, but it's Cracked Bridge where all the crack took place, as opposed to the bridge further up which has a crack in it. And it's something else. But this area, as you know, it's very local. So I'm just quoting a few different cases here that I've taken from the papers. So there were some very serious cases and also some lighter things that I came on, but this one here was from the Belfast newsletter of the 22nd of March 1869. And it was the headline, St Patrick's Day, a man shot near Poyntzpass. So probably a bit of it here, at Poyntzpass on St Patrick's Day, a man named Hugh McNally was shot while leading a drumming party. And at present there's not the slightest hope of his recovery. The particulars are these. A party of men marched from Ahuntarhan to Glen Chapel, where they were met by another party belonging to Glen, and also by a third party from Bar. The different bodies had drums and fifes, and they played about this district for upwards of 4 hours. And the body then proceeded towards the Crack Bridge, which is what you see in front of you, and their numbers being large, perhaps about 500, they became bold and marched through Dunbanagher on the way to Poyntzpass, where the residents are almost exclusively Protestant. The drumming party seemed to enjoy their triumph in being able to march through the streets of Poyntzpass, and they were well armed, a convincing proof of which was that shots were being continually discharged from the procession. And we understand, this is the paper written, that several shots in reply were fired from the rear premises of some of the houses in the street. But all these shots were merely bravado and haven't been aimed at not been aimed at anyone in particular. So before the magistrates arrived, the party left firing shots going to the direction of Glen, and the drumming party on reaching Damone Wood were interrupted in their further progress. And here it is said that some of the Protestant parties were assembled and 3 shots were fired. One of these, we regret to say, it took effect on a young man named McNally, who was one of the leaders, was shot in the breast and mortally wounded. So as you can see, we have had our share of all sorts of cases in Poyntzpass. Now this investigation was held in the police barracks at Poyntzpass before William M. Miller Esquire, Robert Quinn Alexander, JP, the County Inspector St Ledger and Sub-Inspector Black, and they were present on behalf of the Crown. A great number of witnesses were examined, after which the court decided on admitting Robinson and Clements to bail and remanded Clark for a week, and he refusing to accept bail. In the evening, Clark was marched off to Armagh Jail under a strong escort of police, and it's confidently believed that he had nothing to do with the matter, but it's a case of mistaken identity. And some of the leaders of the aggressive mob are to be summoned for riotous conduct. And that was the Newry Telegraph. Well, that was in the Belfast newsletter, but it was from the Newry Telegraph. So it wasn't just all minute details as some people might have thought in the small village case courthouses. Now this is just one that I included. It's actually from Market Hill, committed to Armagh Jail, but it's at Market Hill Sessions, and it was just because of the severity of the, well, I thought the severity for what the cases were. So during last week, the following persons were committed to jail for trial: Mary McMahon and Elizabeth Bright for stealing a quantity of potatoes and a bag, and a Ballybot Mary Hughes for stealing a quantity of meal, Richard Casey for stealing a shirt, Robert O'Rourke for a like offence, James Cunningham for stealing a cloth cloak, and at Newtown Hamilton Sessions, William Lowry and James Bailey for stealing a spade and a quantity of wearing apparel. And in Armagh, William and James McKenna for stealing a quantity of wearing apparel, the property of John Irwin and Mary Ann Foster. Now these cases all took place in 1850. So remembering at the time it was famine, or not long after, probably still very hard times. So they weren't just stealing food, they were stealing clothes, bags, something probably to try and get work with. The spade is what I made of it. So the majority of it was clothing and shirt, as you say, things like that. So it wasn't just to eat, it was probably just to get a few pounds to try and keep going. So it just lets you see how bad certain things were for some people. Now there were all sorts of things going on at petty sessions. It wasn't just for cases. They tried, you had inquests, you had divorce cases, you had anything from murder, manslaughter to petty crimes as we would think of with the drunkenness and lesser crime. But I just came across this one here, and this is 1866. So it's the bottom page there, found a considerable sum of money in banknotes. The owner proving the property before the magistrates of petty sessions at Poyntzpass, paying the advertising expenses and rewarding the poor honest man who found it, may hear of his or her money and obtain it by applying to Mr. Crozier Priestley, Poyntzpass. So I don't know what a considerable sum of money is in those days, but I would say it was quite a lot, and I just find it a bit strange that nobody had been looking for it, that they had to advertise for someone to come forward to get it. But if you take in comparison above, there's a £2 reward for something, so I take it was a lot more than that kind of money, and nobody missed it. Now, these again were just a few things. This is taken from the New Reporter 1918, so still wartime. And can you read that okay? I'll just read it out anyway in case I don't know. So yesterday at the monthly sessions, and Constable Griffith Bestbrook, Mr. Edward Lockhart, George Pass, and Mr. W. Henry Gorewood were each fined, no, the constable wasn't, but he had taken Edward Lockhart, William Henry Gorewood were each fined 10 shillings and costs for breaches of the potatoes order. That's the growers' returns. The following persons were each fined 10 shillings and costs for exposing sheep for sale in Poyntzpass Fair on the 6th of July last without declarations that they had been dipped. So you have James Best, George Pass, or Whiteside, that's not your part, or Whiteside from Banagher, A. Bryson, 4 times, James Ruddick, Poyntzpass, and F. Devlin, Poyntzpass. The complainant being Sergeant Larry. So it was, a lot of these names are still in the area, long-standing farming communities, but I don't know, 10 shillings, is that a big fine? Big enough, I'm sure, in 1918. There wouldn't have been a whole lot of spare money, I'm sure, in war years either. And now, another one is 1918 again, and J.P. Fox, having exposed sheep for sale without declarations that they had been dipped. So that's something similar to part of the last one. The following were fined the sums, and that is W. Finch, sums and costs. Robert Minnis, 3 shillings in costs. J. Bittles, 5 shillings in costs. F. I could read that before we got it. It's Brian. Brooke, 7 shillings in costs. And D. Nickel, H. Devlin, T. McGivern were each fined 1 shilling on costs for driving carts without lights after lighting up time. So we're still in the war years there, so that would have been, I'm sure, a very big offence after lighting up time. And for having allowed cattle to wander on the public road, Robert Carson, Poyntzpass, was mulcted. Now I haven't seen that word before. Is there anybody else? Mulcted, I think that's one for Seamus Murphy for his words, or maybe he already has it. So it was mulcted. I've looked at it in the dictionary, it's not there. In 1 shilling and costs. And for drunkenness, W. Murdo was fined 1 shilling and costs, and W. Hazley Poyntzpass 2 and 6pence and costs. And for a second offence, 5 shillings and costs. So he paid 3 times there, I think. I worked that out, 2 and 6pence and 5 shillings. Now, some of you may recognise this, on top of Mason Street. This was one of the establishments where a lot of these people were coming from when they incurred these fines. So that is now the Dyke Inn. Hasn't, well, it has changed, but to my mind it hasn't changed an awful lot. It's the same structure there at the front. Yes, the right hand side is totally different. But this is the house on the bar area to the right, and the angled gable wall there, which was built to suit the lane going down beside it. So this was Mrs. Mann's, it was known as in those days. And Mrs. Mann's was one of the places where a few of these parties, were coming from. So we also had some light-hearted things going on in the courtroom. So this was at the meeting, setting up the petty sessions. After normal business concluded, the chairman referred to the recent marriage of the clerk, Mr. R.G. Emerson, and said he desired to congratulate him upon his entry to a new sphere of life and to wish him and his wife every happiness. And they as magistrates felt how efficient and how helpful Mr. Emerson was, and he had their best wishes for his future happiness and prosperity. And Mr. H.A. McGuinness, Heber, JP joined in what had been said. He had known Mr. Emerson for a long time and had always found he capably discharged his duties and was socially and otherwise a thorough gentleman. And then it was hear from everyone. Mr. Cannon, a solicitor in Newry, to other gentlemen connected with the administration of the law in this district, I would say, go thou and do likewise. And Mr. McGuinness, I intend to. So, with a lot of laughter, they had hearty congratulations to the new groom. So these were all recorded in the paper. Now, you all recognise that, Railway Street, so this was formerly the RIC barracks in Railway Street, Poyntzpass, and as you know, the petty sessions was only across the road, so hadn't too far to take anyone who was housed in there, which worked out probably not too bad for the police at the time. But I have another picture of, no, that's not it. This is another list from the paper just to let you see what kind of payments or fines there were. So drunken charge, which was quite often the norm every month, that would have been the most dominant thing. So John told Ballinalek for being drunk in charge of a horse and cart on the 12th of November, and also for having no light on his cart on the same date. And he said the reason he had no light was that he was called to an inquest at the workhouse, and only that he was detained he would not have needed the lamp, so he was there till after dark. The constable said that when Toll gave him this explanation, he told him to go home and there would be nothing more about it. But at 10 p.m. he got him drunk again in the village. So the defendant gave a verbal statement as to his proceedings during the evening in question, but the chairman remarked that the question was whether he, the defendant, was drunk. And the defendant said, I had some drink taken, but I wasn't a bit drunk. So fines of 10 shillings and costs, and 1 shilling and costs in the second case were imposed. And below again we have the same, no name on the cart, which I suppose in those days was like your registration, like your car registration. Constable Summers summoned James Mallon Ballinalek for having a horse and cart on the public street without having his name on it, and for being at such a distance from the horse and cart as not to be in control of it. The constable said he had to take the horse and cart into livery as he could not find anyone in charge of it, and the defendant did not come until the next day. The defendant said the cart was a neighbour's cart. Some tar had got over the name and had obliterated it. And the constable said the defendant made that explanation to him but could not point out where the name had been. So there was a plate there but no appearance of a name whatsoever, and a fine of 1 shilling and costs was imposed in each case. So I'm not going to get away with saying it was there and it just fell off or anything like it. These were just, this is a picture that had been used before in Roy's talk, but just quite a few of these faces were just in Uri or a few around here too. So hence there would have been the big farmers of the day or big employers. That McIlvaine is one that comes up in Poyntzpass quite often, FB Small, and Heber McGuinness, which is back right. Yeah, so they were quite often sitting in Poyntzpass petty sessions, as well as some of the others that tended to move around the same ones. Now, this is a picture of the square with the RIC barracks there, which you can see is the only difference really on that street, or on either street, is the porch that was on the front. So that's the time when it was the actual police station, and it had that little porch where now it has the steps up to it, which is at McCarthy's down the street. But I like the photo, I like the tree, and it looks big wide. Well, it is a big wide street, but it doesn't look as wide now as it did then, before we had 2 roundabouts and whatever else we have in the square. But the rest of the outline of the buildings up the street remain somewhat the same, apart from here, the community centre, which would be higher, but everything else, the roof level and all seems to be the same. And here, like Canavan's, is just beside the RIC, which building's just the same. These are the wee, what was it, like the off license on the other wee barber shop beside it. So that much hasn't really changed at all. Now, I was just going through photographs, looking for things connected to the village and some of these cases. So came on this one, which is, as I'm sure you all recognise, Clark's, what was Henry Clark's, the back of it, the warehouses. This must have been the time when it was getting ready for, stripped off the roof, getting ready for being demolished, as it turned out. So that had been the scene, if you remember, in Hugh Daly's talk not that long back, the fatal affray in the Far Pass. That was the building where that occurred, which was a hotel in those days. But it was a very impressive and large building, which is no longer there now. Progress. And recognise that we want to, that this was mentioned in some cases that, I haven't actually got one here, but as in on the ridge that day of the Glen and the marchers, so you're very near the Crack Bridge there. So they're just nice photos that I've come across. No, I'm sorry, I have to go back one. Back to yes, there are a few more just things that not necessarily held in Poyntzpass, but that I thought were worth mentioning. So in the Belfast Newsletter of 1896, at Fork Hill Petty Sessions, an important point under the Food and Drugs Act was decided. So a Sergeant Ewing of Poyntzpass, who was an inspector under the Food and Drugs Act, summoned Mr. George McClory, a grocer of Jonesborough, for exposing for sale coffee containing 65 parts of chicory and 35 parts of coffee. Mr. Russell Newry, who defended, stated that the inspector should have informed the defendant that he required the goods for the purpose of being analysed by the public analyst, and in support of the contention, Mr. Russell referred the magistrates to the case of Budge versus Cripps, deciding this point. So the chairman said this was certainly a fatal objection and they would dismiss the case. So there you are. Those kind of things happened back then too, things being dismissed. Now just another one that I came on 1909 May, seen at a lodging house. There were quite a few lodging houses in the village in those days, and the people presiding at this one was Mr. A. McElvain and Heber McGuinness. And there was a special court in Poyntzpass when a woman named Mary Ann McManus was put forward in custody charged with having seriously assaulted an army pensioner named Robert McElroy. And this is by striking him on the head with a pair of tongs. The accused appeared with a baby in her arms, and the prosecutor was on behalf of the Crown, and the accused was undefended. So Robert McElroy deposed that he had a slight recollection of having some unpleasantness with persons in his lodging house on the night in question. He'd been in Portadown on that day, and on his return to his lodgings he was drunk. He remembered nothing of what happened to him, but he lost a lot of blood. And in reply to the accused, he said he did not remember insulting her or striking her on the face. Mrs. McQuaid deposed that on the evening in question, McElroy, who was a lodger of hers, came into the house drunk, and seeing her sitting at the fire, made a grab for her. The woman resented this and lifted the tongs and struck him on the head, and the blow knocked him down. And while this row was going on, John McManus, husband of the accused, came into the house and jumped on McElroy when he was lying on the floor. So you can picture the scene here. So, the doctor, he was in such a weak state that the witness sent for a doctor who just dressed the wound and stopped the hemorrhage. And the doctor would not certify that McElroy's life was not in danger. And the witness arrested the accused, who stated she did not strike McElroy with the tongs, but that he called her out of her name. So the sergeant asked the magistrates to reduce the charge to one of common assault and deal with the case. No doubt the lady had been provoked. And the answer was, the chairman said the magistrates were of the opinion that the accused got a very great deal of provocation, and what she did was probably in self-defence. She had already been a week in jail, and they thought that would make the case. So that was Rosie. We also had a few amusing cases. Now one, which I'm not going to mention any names, but there were certain people in the village who, or certain person in the village who was arrested for smuggling silk stockings over the border. And this would have been, I suppose it was wartime. Other kind of seemed to be funny, but possibly weren't funny at all. John Campbell told me a story about his father and Paddy McCourt being arrested coming from Newry, or stopped by the police at Poyntzpass and arrested for being drunk, or one was arrested for being drunk, one not having a light on his bicycle. And this constable Boston was well known in the village and would have been hanging around, not hanging around, but been around the corner. But he had never mentioned it again to John's father every time he saw him. So he got sort of a bit amused by this and wondered why he hadn't said anything about it. So he stopped and said, "Would you have a light for my bicycle?" to see if he would respond. And he says, "No, but if you go down to the barracks, I'm sure Boston will get you one." So he did know all about it all along, he just wasn't saying anything of it. Now I came on with several cases of manslaughter and things of that offence. One was also a stabbing incident in which the defendant said or the accused rather said, he hadn't stabbed the man, but he had run onto his hand. I think that one's still used nowadays. But one thing I found, which I thought was quite funny, was it's called Justice in Its Cups, the title in the paper at the time, and it was 1878 in the Belfast Newsletter, and this was before we had the petty sessions, so this was when we had the manor courts, and this was from a lecture delivered in Banbridge by Mr. Thomas MacLeod of Belfast on his experience of an Irish manor court. And this is him speaking now. I will tell you of a case I had at Poyntzpass in a manor court there on the estate of Colonel Close. The sentinel was Mr. Mitchell, a most amiable gentleman, but without any legal training. I went specially to Poyntzpass on the occasion I refer to. I started early and was there about 11 o'clock, thinking the court would sit about that time. But on inquiry, I found Mr. Mitchell held 3 other courts in the district parts of the county and usually arrived at the pass, as it is called, about 3 o'clock. I was obliged therefore to wait with as much patience as I could, considering meanwhile how was I to make my client pay extra for the delay. So it was nearly 4 o'clock when Mr. Mitchell arrived, and instead of once opening his court, he proceeded to a public house kept by a comely woman called Hamilton. And having heard I was in attendance, he sent for me at once. I found the gentleman engaged with the agriculturalist of Colonel Close, and having greeted me most warmly, he further ordered up a bowl of broth for each of us. The broth was good and I was hungry, and we soon finished it. Then he ordered a glass of whisky, punch for each of us, which was also good. Then the agriculturist, an educated and accomplished man, ordered 3 additional bowls of broth and afterwards 3 tumblers of punch, which were also consumed. I should have stated the broth was excellent and had everything in it that good broth ought to have, and among the rest, marigolds, which gave it an agreeably peculiar flavour. It now came my turn, and I ordered a like quantity of broth and punch, of which we all partook. So I ventured to ask about the court, but the sentinel told me to make myself easy about that, as he would make my case all right, and get me a verdict that would satisfy me. The court was opened about 5 o'clock, and the jury had been in readiness and were duly sworn. I was not allowed to sit in the place where advocates usually sit, but the sentinel insisted, greatly against my inclination, that I would occupy his chair, and on no account would he permit me to stand up when I addressed him and the jury. I was for the defendant, and in truth had no valid defence, but I was allowed every latitude with the witnesses. I recall I made, I fear, a very discursive speech, and then was myself examined by most of the jury. I need not worry you with the details of the case, except to say that the verdict returned was an extraordinary one, inasmuch as it was contingent and was not to be put in force, and if my client, the defendant, would come to the court on the next sitting day and swear she thought the money was not due, the sentinel would not allow the decree to issue. I could give you a number of instances of cases where the power of the court was set at naught, and of the improper conduct of juries, their getting tipsy and refusing to give in their verdicts until a certain amount of strong drink was supplied. I have also heard of drunken and careless sentinels, but never saw any of that class. So I think he's maybe contradicting himself a wee bit there, he didn't see any of those lads. So as you can see, the whole petty sessions court system, it seemed to work very well. It was in all the small towns and villages and larger towns, and most of these took place every month. I just leave you then with what petty sessions is doing now. So this was just a picture was taken, I think it was one of the culture nights, maybe, it wouldn't have been the first one, but it was maybe one or other. So that's outside, and the Poyntzpass Silver Band. That's back to I just had the one there. And back to this one of the village square, which is strange again because the earlier one just had the kids and the horse and cart. This one doesn't seem to have very much of anything, and absolutely no cars parked. Well, one little van there on the right hand side. Anybody know whose that is or what it is? And it's like outside where the chemist is now. Really? Is it a mini? It's like a wee small, it looks very small there. And that's it. Thank you very much.